The future of film and TV production is in Ontario. We've expanded our studio space. We've built virtual production sets, Canada's largest backlot, and an unparalleled workforce. Our Ontario Green Screen program ensures a more sustainable industry. We are Ontario, and we're ready to roll.
Filmmaking and good filmmaking requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage.
Stories. That is the foundation of what we do as artists, just stories.
If more people who look like us and think like us are in positions of power, that is a cause for optimism.
It's very, very important that we put the stories in the hands of the people who own those stories.
And if it wasn't for Toronto, actually, I would not be here talking to Toronto.
We're in the period of misinformation.
This was the irony generation.
Hello everyone, I'm Sophia.
I wasn't thinking to myself, I must be strong. I didn't know I was strong.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this sixth day of the Industry Conference, the final day of the Industry Conference, the best day of the Industry Conference. My name is Tom Powers. I'm the documentary programmer at TIFF. To begin, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you are on and its history. TIFF and Glenn Gould Studio are located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful to work on this land and to bring the work of Indigenous artists to our audience. I also want to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, Visa, and Bulgari, our major industry supporters, Telefilm Canada and Ontario Creates, and our media partner, The Hollywood Reporter, for supporting the Visionaries strand. So this is the first of 5 sessions we have today. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what's coming up. At 11 a.m., we've got a session called Covering Afghanistan with the filmmakers of In Her Hands that made its world premiere this week. At 1:15, after lunch, we'll be here with Laura Poitras, who has her new film, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, that made its TIFF premiere last night. At 2:15, the filmmaker Vinay Shukla, whose new film, While We Watched, is making its world premiere at TIFF. That session is called Truth, Lies, and $1 Million Board Game. Talks about, in addition to Vinay talking about his film, he's going to talk about the board game that he created as a spin-off of his last film that went on to sell $1 million worth of units, I guess we call them. And then the concluding session, 3:15, Documentality, talking about this new initiative to explore mental health in the documentary industry. We're going to begin today with a familiar guest at the Toronto Film Festival. Werner Herzog has been here many times in the 17 years that I've been the documentary programmer, almost more than any other filmmaker during my term. His new film is called Theater of Thought. It is an exploration of the brain, and he's talking to brain scientists and researchers and other people looking at an exploration of the brain from many different points of view. He's going to be joined today by 2 of the people in the film. And did anyone get to see the film yesterday? Let me show of hands. Okay, I'm seeing about a quarter of the hands up. If you didn't see the film, no worry. We're going to show you a couple short clips that's going to introduce you to the other figures on stage. Those 2 other figures are Rafael Yuste. I said Rafaela, that's my wife's name. Rafael Yuste. Who is a brain scientist. You don't have to be a brain scientist to be on this panel, but Rafael is. And our final panelist is Jamie Daves, an entrepreneur who you're going to learn more about when we see this clip. So it's my great pleasure to kick this off. Please welcome Werner Herzog, Rafael Yuste, and Jamie Daves. Werner, you can sit here. So, Werner, over the years, you've been here with films about Antarctica, volcanoes, meteors, and this new film, Theater of Thought, you're taking us in between our ears. What was it that made you want to make a film about the brain? So often we think about your films as being transported to wild landscapes. This is a much more interior exploration.
I can only say this, in a way the film has been dormant in me without me knowing exactly what I would do. I've always been fascinated by our conditioning, cultural conditioning, for example. Why is it that we accept norms, cultural norms, that are absolutely the day-to-day life, like, let's say, life with human sacrifice. You have to do it because the universe has to be kept in motion. How are we living certain illusions? How do we shape our memories? What happens to us with our feelings? How do we understand the mystery and the agony of love? All these things have been somehow in me, and then suddenly I was contacted by Rafael Yuste, and that immediately triggered it. So he got me into the mess of doing that film, and we almost started out, of course, with preparation, because Rafael would lay out the roadmap for some sort of a road movie.
He helped introduce you to lots of different...
Yes, I would not know any of them, with exception of one or two of whom I had heard. But that was laid out, and we did it methodically, very quickly, because the COVID restrictions were lifted, or almost lifted. And I was worried they might come back, and a few weeks later we would have the next shutdown. So we acted very fast.
So in a second, we'll watch a clip of the film that sort of talks a little bit about Rafael's work, but can you, in your own words, describe who Rafael is and why you wanted him to be this guide?
Well, he approached me, and I immediately saw that there was something very well thought over, not only his expertise in studying brain of very small creatures, very primordial creatures. He was into all sorts of facets of these studies, telepathy, and restoring, for example, eyesight, that the blind can see to some degree, and very rudimentary, and just the entire facets of what is going on. And in this case, it was clear he was the right one. And of course, I was fascinated by his studies, these tiny creatures that have amazing abilities. And I think in the clip we can see it.
Let's watch that clip of Rafael right now.
We are looking here at tiny creatures called hydra. They can be found in ponds, in lakes, and sometimes they can be a nuisance in your aquarium at home. They are Rafael Yuste's prime target of research. This is your workplace.
Yes, this is the lab. Welcome to the lab. So what we do is these hydras, for us, are a little bit like the Rosetta Stone to the brain. Because if we can understand the hydra and we can break the code, it's like breaking the code of an ancient language. It's very likely that evolution is using exact same tricks from hydra to humans.
How tiny are they?
They're about a couple of millimeters to about half a centimeter, depending on the species. They have tentacles. These tentacles have little harpoons that shoot darts, supersonic speeds. This is the earliest nervous systems in evolution. The first animals that have neurons, 750 million years ago, okay? Initially, people thought they were plants. Then it was found that they move and they eat and they're animals. And these are the simplest animals that have a nervous system. They're sort of attached in the bottom to the plate. So they have a foot and they have a mouth, and these are the tentacles. See the tentacles? And with the tentacles, they see the world. They can also smell, they detect chemicals, and they can feel the vibrations in the water, okay? And you know something that's fascinating? These guys have a few hundred neurons, and if they want to move from here to here, they only have one foot. So you know what they do? They somersault. They attach the mouth and the tentacles to the floor, and then they let go of the foot, and then they flip, and they attach the foot on the other side, and they let go of the mouth.
Rafael, you approached Werner. What attracted you to Werner, and what were you hoping to engage him with?
So I have actually a personal story to tell you. Werner, for me, has been an important figure since I was 19, because the very first money that I ever made was translating one of his movies, Stotzek, into Spanish. So I love Werner. I watch religiously everything he made, and we got involved in ethical issues of neurotechnology that we'll talk about it later, I hope. And I thought, and we've done a lot of advocacy and going and knocking on many doors and interface with the UN and different governments. But I thought a documentary from someone like Werner could have a much bigger impact, okay, in the world than all the work that we're doing, and that all the people that he's interviewed, no? Because he can translate a complicated concept, in this case, something extraordinary that is happening, which is a revolution in neuroscience, and bring it to the world. And I think Werner, not because I was involved in the movie, but I think this is a home run, because this is the first movie that takes a comprehensive view of neuroscience, digests it to its essence, why this is going to be important. And it's actually in the title of the movie, The Theater of Thought. We're finally understanding how the brain works. No? And it's some sort of theater of thoughts. And he's bringing it to the world, to the citizens. And he's explaining very clearly what's going on, what's important, what we know, what we don't know, what are the good sides of it for humanity, like the medical benefits, and also what are the risks associated with all of this knowledge. So I think that movie takes the entire picture.
So in the film, as my experience it, some of it feels like science, like when I watch you and you're looking through a microscope, that looks like science to me. Some of the film feels like science fiction when you're talking about machines that could read people's thoughts, or the potential to implant chips in the future for good or bad reasons. You brought up the work that you do around thinking about human rights. You, I feel from this film, are thinking a few steps ahead. We may not yet have the equipment that actually reads people's thoughts, but I think what you're saying is we're not that far away from it. And I mean, Werner, can I ask you, the science fiction elements, what feels like science fiction elements of this story, I feel like you're saying we're not that far away from it, we need to start thinking about it now.
Well, some of it is not science fiction. If you have telepathy, one person who is connected to a computer interface makes this with his hand. And 5 miles away, some person who is on the internet and also connected to these signals of movement, starts to do exactly the same movement in sync. So it's not science fiction anymore. Or certain things that, like people who have been in wheelchairs and they, in certain cases, do walk again or much better, or many other things. Rafael is studying this tiny hydra, and they have only a few hundred neurons, but they are capable, when they are completely disassembled and made to a pulp, they reassemble themselves. So can we learn somehow how we are healing wounds, or if you lose an arm, that it grows back again? It may come fairly soon. And it's totally stunning. How do they know? And of course, even these creatures that have a few hundred neurons have a sense of self. They seem to be pulsing neurons in a way that they understand, yes, I'm one creature, and I can reach out with tentacles, and I will bring in the prey. So the question of self is really very, very fascinating as a philosophical concept, and how we as human beings are capable to live. So many of the things are not science fiction. They have been there forever, or they have gained momentum in a way that is unprecedented. And what, for example, Jared Genser, who is sitting here, the human rights lawyer, says, the public worldwide is utterly unprepared for what is coming at us. And this is an important aspect, and I think Rafael and Jared Genser, and I think Jamie Daves also have been very active in promoting legislation and formulating new human rights, autonomy of thoughts. We have learned about, of course, freedom of speech, but freedom, autonomy of thought is something which becomes more and more important. And I think, Rafael, you had some contact with the United Nations. There's something new coming. They seem to have caught the bug.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring in Jamie in a second, but just staying on this theme. So, Rafael, what Werner's talking about, trying to advocate for human rights legislation around new technology involving the brain. It sounds a little abstract. Can you kind of attach this to something concrete? You know, what is something that...
Yeah, so this is actually very simple. The brain is not just another organ of the body. It happens to be the organ that generates all of our mental and cognitive abilities. No? All of your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, your imagination, even the subconscious part of your behavior, and all your behavior is coming out of here. For the first time in history, we have technology that lets us get into the brain, see what's happening, decode it, and change it and alter it. No? So this is...
You're not just talking about my Instagram ads.
No. This goes to the core of who you are. I mean, I can tell you as a scientist that you're not more than the activity of the neurons in your brain. And science, for the first time, is getting in there. And we're starting to decode it. This is what I was referring to, breaking an ancient language. By studying different types of animals, we start to decode what the brain is doing, how the brain works. And this is a revolution. This is a fundamental change in our history. I think this is going to be like a new renaissance, because we'll get to understand ourselves. So this comes on the shoulder of neurotechnology, which are devices to essentially read the activity of the brain and change the activity of the brain. It's not science fiction. We've been developing this in animal experimental studies. And we're not doing this just for no good reason. We're trying to figure out how the brain works so that we can help the patients that have neurological and mental diseases. I'm sure everyone here in the audience has a family member or friend that suffers from a brain disease, and you know perfectly well, like I do, that there's nothing we can do essentially for these people. No? So we need to get in and urgently figure out how the brain works, help the patients. But science is neutral, so the same methods, the same techniques to help you out can be used for purposes that are not altruistic. No? And that's where the human rights come in. So you can think of the existing human rights of protecting essentially your body and the things you do in life, and they have a great history since 1948. But we're living in the 21st century. Now we have to protect also our brains, because that's who we are. And if this is not a human rights problem, what is a human rights problem? No? So that's where we came up with the idea of neuro rights, and we here, it's a group of concerned scientists and researchers and clinicians. And this reflects on the creation of this Neuro Rights Foundation and our discussions with the UN, with the government of Chile, with the government of Spain, initial discussion with the White House, etc.
Great. Let me bring Jamie into this. So, Jamie, in the context of this film, you have 2 points of connection. You have a personal connection, which we're going to see described more in the clip. But then you also work as a supporter and financer of entrepreneurs through your organization, Everyone Inc. And some of the things that we're talking about is how to make technology better for society are things that you're thinking about a lot. And so we can talk more about that. But let me just ask you from a personal standpoint, when Rafael introduced you to Werner and you were invited to participate in this film, did you know the works of Werner Herzog?
For sure I did. I thought it was a great partnership right away. And one of the things that he brings, like really your opening comment, the idea that we make machines and then our machines make us, Werner connects to this deeper idea where that's not just the science and technology, that's culture as well. It's how we design our political systems, how we design our cultural systems as well. And the existential science and tech that's being pioneered now, not just in neurotechnology, but in gene editing and in other fields, forces us to reconsider those stories, forces us to consider both individually and collectively, what do we value, what's our purpose, and is the structures and systems that we've built right now, what is a company or a market, what is a political system, like what are our cultural systems and the things that we value within them, are they structured in the right way? And his entire career and work has delved into a lot of those questions.
Let's get to know a little bit more about Jamie by watching a clip from the film where Werner introduces him.
Jamie Daves has been active in venture capital and policies to reconcile technical progress with moral standards. His personal story is remarkable.
Jamie Daves, your brain has been invaded. What happened?
It's happened, I'll call it 1.5 times. The first time it turned out I had a pituitary tumor for a condition called acromegaly. We call it gigantism also. It makes some people grow quite large, like Andre the Giant. Other people have maybe less dramatic effects. Really, it wasn't until I was about 30 that I was diagnosed, and I had what's called transsphenoidal surgery, where they go up through your nose and they use lasers to remove the tumor. I had great surgeons. It actually didn't work, so I still take medication to control it. So I've had 1 neurosurgery for that and a second neurosurgery as a result of an accident that I had.
What happened and what did they do?
So I was in an accident, a freak accident. Somebody jumped on my back. One of the things about being a large guy is sometimes people jump on you, and I fell over awkwardly and was instantly paralyzed from the neck down. Unfortunately, I even stopped breathing while in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, had to be intubated, and was a full quadriplegic for a period of time. Luckily, it's a bruise on your spinal cord. They don't promise you anything, but over time I got better and returned my function, more on my left side and eventually more on my right side.
You were in a wheelchair?
So I was in a wheelchair for a period of time for a couple, 2-3 months, and began to be able to walk again later. There's a changed nature of the human experience itself, because with brain-computer interface technologies, we have a new story about what we can do with it to do incredible, wonderful things like getting people out of a wheelchair. But it also creates a set of feedback loops, which actually will impact the human experience as well.
So Werner, when Rafael introduced you to Jamie, it wasn't to tell that personal story. Jamie is describing to me that you had a conversation for a few hours about the work he does as an entrepreneur and thinking about how to take this new brain technology and bring it out into the world in a in the best way possible. But somewhere along the way, you understood that he had this personal story. Can you talk about how you blend the personal and the scientific in this film?
Well, you should not assume that I'm coming on location and I meet, let's say, Jamie Daves, and I know very much about him. Well, the general sort of aspect, I was briefed. And I come not as a journalist with a catalog of questions. I'm just very, very curious. And that's why when he mentioned casually an accident, what happened, I get curious. And of course, I knew his brain had been invaded. And not only once, you say 1.5 times. But all of a sudden, I'm not interested in in his personal story with a freak accident and paralysis and all this. We start to talk about, I start listening about, would you like to communicate with a hummingbird? And he says instantly, unfortunately, that the real good part of our conversation is missing. Would you like to communicate with a hummingbird? It just came to me. And instantly he says, yes. And then starts to think about mutualism, solidarity between a hummingbird and a human who help each other. And then all of a sudden he says something completely stunning. My favorite moment in the entire film, he says, as big as he is, and he sits there and he says, I would love to dance with a hummingbird. And I was just about to say something else, and something inside of myself shouted, Werner, shut up. And I shut up, and Jamie is left alone without a question, and he starts to dream. He starts to dream dancing with a hummingbird or whatever is going on, and then he lowers his eyes, and I hang on, hang on, hang on, hang on. Music is starting, and all of a sudden you are very, very deeply touched because we as an audience seem to look into his very soul. If we do or not remains each individual's ability or whatever, but there are moments, there are strange moments of insight and illumination that I've been after in all my films, almost all my films. And here we have a moment, and it's really, really very beautiful. And I thank you for...
Thank you, Werner.
For not saying anything anymore. You didn't feel, for me it was clear, don't say anything. And you kind of felt it was enough, you don't have to make any further declaration.
No,
and that's how all of a sudden we who did not know each other start to communicate in a different way.
Yeah, I felt that. I mean, one of the things that was so evocative of that question is that I connected it not only to the personal experience that I might have with that, and I think my injury and what I'd been through connects to the idea of like how tools could let me, and a connection can let me move physically, connect emotionally in a different way. But also that connected to the reason why I got involved in the Neurorights Foundation to begin with, which was this idea of like, what do we do with these new superpowers and to what purpose do they serve? And all of the deeper questions around this about goes to even things of like, how do we trust? And mutualism is like the way that we trust. Like, we need privacy rules, we need protections without question, but part of the reason we need that is because of the questions we might have about who's using the technology, what do they have access to, what is the company, the government, et cetera. And so that question both moved me very much personally, I think because of my own personal experience, but also, you know, made me deeply reflective about the nature of this particular existential science and tech, and how do we come to grips with it, and, you know, both not just intellectually, but like emotionally as well.
Rafael, sometimes we say about people, I really like the way their mind works or their brain works. I think that's something that people would say about Werner Herzog. He has such an interesting way, the way his brain works. Is that, can you help us understand what we mean when we say that?
So as a scientist, I can tell you that we don't know. So we're hardcore ground-touching people, no? And we don't understand enough of the brain to sort of know how someone thinks or doesn't think. So that's
you don't know why you're super smart and I'm not.
I'm not. You're going to make me blush here and think I hope my mother is watching. but there's something, again, within the, I think there's an idea that I think the audience should walk out of here with in terms of what's going on, is that even though we don't understand how the brain works, there is a theory, there's a very likely possibility that it is a theater of thought, that is essentially a machine to generate a virtual reality model of the world, and that model is the world that we think we live in. So what your reality, just think about that, it may all be generated, created by your brain. So this may seem very awkward, that we don't live we don't experience the world as it is, but as our brain is making it up or generating it. But this is consistent. First of all, it was an idea first proposed by philosophers, by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. This is consistent with the data that we're obtaining in the laboratories in neuroscience all over the world. And this can let us understand what's wrong, let's say, with schizophrenics, where this model of the world is not really connected to the world, and can let us understand what is a thought, what is a memory, and sooner or later, without any unavoidably, we will get to understanding how does one think, why do you think different than I think, what is intelligence, what is consciousness. All these things, as a scientist, we'll get to them. It's just a matter of time. If you look at the progress of science and medicine, it's been continuous, and it will continue to do that. Also, and this movie brings a little bit that magic of science and this idea of how the brain works out. So that's what I'm sort of in awe how Werner has been able to digest an entire field, something that he knew very little about, and he got to the essence of it and stuck it in the title.
Werner, on a personal level, did you have questions about how your own brain works?
Of course I do. And I'm asking myself, what kind of fantasies do I develop? What kind of memories are shifting in me? There's a very strange example in the film on the internet. I'm asking a question to also scientists, and I ask them, does the internet dream of itself? A very deep question. And before I ask the question, I say, I'm continuing something the famous war theoretician von Clausewitz, Napoleonic time on war, in his theory of war, has asked, does war sometimes dream of itself? Now comes a strange thing. Scholars who have studied von Clausewitz tell me he never wrote that. So apparently I made this up decades ago, that von Clausewitz said that. And I was so enthralled by it over decades that I firmly believe Clausewitz said it. And I adopted my own invention as a solid memory of something. So what is wrong here? I think nothing is wrong. That's how memory sometimes goes wild and reshapes things. Or how much am I in performances? Sure, when I'm playing a villain for a Jack Reacher, for example, it's a performance. But other things, when I'm best man during a wedding, it's completely performative. And I fulfill every single step of the ritual. When I talk to my children, it's a different persona, different attitude, different ritualistic performances that I deliver. So of course, I always ask myself, what the hell is going on here? And also, I ask myself, what somehow puts me apart from my peers in school. I never liked school very much because I noticed that the intelligence or stupidity, and you should never speak of stupidity because, of course, it was a joke, but intelligence is always a bundle of abilities, memory, linguistic skills, social skills, musicality, mathematics, you just name it, a whole bundle of qualities. And my bundle was somehow tied together slightly differently, and I was a foreigner in school. Why am I a foreigner? And just recently during shooting, somebody asked me about storytelling, and I said, yes, I'm good at storytelling. And he said, can you tell a story about anything? And Peter Zeitlinger, my cinematographer, pointed at a rock which was on the ground there, and he says, Werner can tell you a story of the rock right now. And I immediately told the story of the rock. And I'm doing that now with young filmmakers. I do workshops, and I tell them, tell me the story of this cup here, right now. And they're completely at a loss, but they have to learn it. You are storytellers. Do that. And so, of course, there's always some sort, I hate self-reflection, but some essential things I keep wondering about. I'm mystified, and it has never left me.
We just have a few minutes left. Jamie, for most of the audience who hasn't seen the film yet, can you tell me about some of the things that you took away from this? You're in this world, you think about these things a lot, but as you were watching the film again last night, what are things that really stood out to you?
I think just because it connects to what Werner just said is Werner uses the concept of who is the ghostwriter, and he closes the film in part with that question again. And I think one of the things I took away is that, you know, we are the ghostwriters of our own existence, and we should take agency in that, and that we should take ownership over telling our own story, not the story of the cup and the rock, and to be aware that we are in a constructed world. And Werner, I think, goes through in a variety of ways of introducing that concept and then giving us the permission to both see that story and see the construct even of our own biology, of our own mind, and then within that, take ownership of that as well. That's deeply connected to kind of existentialism and the idea then saying, oh, and what do you want to do with it in that way? And I think that's the overall impression that I took around that, and that we now need to write that story individually, but we have to write that story collectively, and we have more tools and awareness to do it than we've ever had before.
And it makes us human. We are looking at deep into what constitutes humanness, and has always fascinated me.
Werner, you turned 80 last week.
Well, I'm coming of age.
You have 2 books out this year, one that's already been published, one that's coming shortly, a kind of memoir. You have 2 new films out this year, including this Theater of Thought. What are your reflections on turning 80?
Well, I try to duck in the trenches, but I can't completely. I was in Telluride, and of course you can't duck when you're in front of an audience, and there was a new film. But what are my own thoughts about this? I love what I do, and it is everything that concerns cinema, writing, directing, editing, producing, you just name it, screening it to an audience, defending a film. So acting in films as a villain, for example, I just love it, and I've been very privileged that, and of course I fought for it very hard over a long time, that I really was capable to do what I wanted to do, the films that I wanted to do, no compromises, no fear, no looking back, and that's fairly unique because everyone in the film industry complains, the financiers are so stupid and they do not recognize my genius and I should be making a new big film. I don't like this culture of complaint. And like in this film, I just rolled up my sleeves and started it without finances, without anything, financing it from my own pocket. However, the applause should also go to the Sloan Foundation, because late in the process of shooting, they noticed, and of course they support films with scientific content, an ideal film for them. And they gave me a grant which took quite some of the burdens away from me, but it was good luck. I was very lucky, and I never counted on being lucky. Just do fight for it and do it, and completely unfazed. Whatever is coming at me, I will deal with it.
Actually, if I can very quickly share with the audience, what is it like to be in a film crew with Werner? So Werner was kind enough to invite me to join the film crew, besides being the scientific advisor, and it was an extraordinary experience. So Werner, as you've heard, he does all this without a script, so he doesn't, everything is improvised, the interviews are all improvised, and the film crew is very small, and with like working class attitude, no hierarchies, everyone does everything. So we had Luke and Gus Holberta doing the sound and the camera, Ariel, Leon taking care of as a producer of pretty much everything, and I ended up being the driver for some parts of it and moving boxes around. And Werner was, and Lena also helped us, Werner's wife, taking pictures of portraits and things like that. It was just extraordinary. We worked really hard. This was all put together in 2 weeks.
But I think you witnessed one thing which might be interesting. While we were traveling, I got frantic phone calls from a production company, I think offering me $500,000 to do this film. And I said without hesitation, because I knew the screenplay, which was lousy, and I said no. And they raised it, I think, to 600,000. And I turned to Rafael, who was on the steering wheel, and I said to him, here goes the finances for the film.
Yes.
So what?
Yes, I told Werner, you just threw out $600,000 out the window, and that could have paid for all this movie. But this is the spirit of working with Werner. I wish you could all have that experience, but this is something that's been an extraordinary moment in my life, not to be part of this, the crew. No? Yeah.
we have to wrap up here. I hope those of you who haven't seen Theater of Thought get a chance to see it. We have another screening tonight, actually, and I hope you take time to reflect on just the challenge of making a film about the brain and brain science. Werner, we hope to have you back at the festival many more times. Please don't go far. At 11 o'clock, we're going to have our next session on the extraordinary film In Her Hands with the filmmakers. I want to give a big thanks to Jimmy Daves, Rafael Yuste, and Werner Herzog.